You have been told your whole life that Jesus used parables to make the truth easier to understand. That is not what Jesus said. Jesus said he used parables so that certain people would not understand, not as an accident, deliberately, with full awareness of the outcome. He said it himself, and the church has been quietly explaining it away ever since. And if that does not disturb something in you, it is possible you have not actually heard it yet. There is a second question underneath that one, quieter, more personal. What determines who receives the truth and who does not? And which side of that line are you on? Most people who click on a video about the parables of Jesus expect a breakdown of familiar stories, some historical context, a few insights to carry into Sunday, something that confirms what they already know and leaves them feeling informed. What you are about to encounter is not that, and by the end of this conversation, you will not be able to pretend you do not know which group you belong to. There is something Jesus said about his own teaching that most people have never seriously sat with. Not because it is hidden. It is right there in the text, in plain sight, in one of the most read books in human history. But it has been quietly set aside, softened, explained around, because if you take it seriously, it destabilizes almost everything modern Christianity assumes about how Jesus communicated. He did not use parables to make truth simple. He used them knowing most people would not understand. Not as a side effect, not as an accident of the cultural moment, intentionally, with full awareness of the outcome. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 10, the disciples came to Jesus with a direct question. They asked him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" Notice who is asking. Not the crowd, the disciples, the people closest to him, the ones who had left their nets and their tax tables and followed him into uncertainty. Even they noticed something strange happening in the space between what Jesus was saying and what the crowds were receiving, and they wanted to understand the mechanics of it. His answer is Matthew chapter 13, verse 11. He answered and said unto them, "Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given." What Jesus is describing is a deliberate asymmetry. Something is being given to certain people. The same something is being withheld from others. And he is doing this through the very act of teaching, through the parables themselves. This is not incidental. He says it is because it is given unto you, because it is not given unto them. The parables are the mechanism of that because. What Jesus is describing is a real division. The same truth is being spoken, but it does not land the same way in everyone. To some, it is given. To others, it is not. And the difference is happening through the parables themselves. Why would Jesus intentionally conceal truth from the very people he came to reach? If the mission was salvation, if the desire was that none would perish, if the love was genuinely universal, why speak in a form that, by his own admission, prevents understanding in most people who hear it? And the deeper question, the one that may land more personally, what determines who it is given to? Because if it is not random, and nothing about this passage suggests randomness, then something is functioning as the criterion. Something in the people who receive determines whether they receive. And whatever that something is, it was present in the disciples in a way it was not present in the crowd. We are going to find out what that something is. But the answer, if it arrives too early, will be filed away as information. And information is precisely what this is not about, as you are about to see. Let us read the passage fully now, slowly, not to get through it, to let it open. And the disciples came and said unto him, "Why speakest thou unto them in parables?" He answered and said unto them, "Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand." Pause there. They seeing see not, hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. He is not describing people who never encountered the truth. He is describing people who are present for it. who are looking directly at it, who are hearing the words with their physical ears, and still not receiving it. The seeing and not seeing are happening simultaneously. The hearing and not hearing are happening simultaneously. This is not a failure of exposure. They are exposed. They are in the front row. They are watching with their eyes open. Something else is happening. He continues, "And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Esaias, which saith, By hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them." Hearts waxed gross. That phrase is one of the most significant in this entire passage, and one of the most consistently skipped in popular Christian teaching. In the Greek it is ipachunte, which carries the sense of becoming thick, dense, impenetrable, not from a single moment of hardness, but from a gradual process, a slow thickening over time. This is not describing evil people. It is describing people whose hearts have become gradually impenetrable through a process that began long before this moment on the hillside. And then this, their eyes they have closed. Not their eyes have been closed by God, they have closed them. Active voice, present ongoing condition, something they are doing. Ears dull of hearing, not ears that have never heard. Ears that have heard so much, perhaps, that they have developed a kind of functional numbness. A dulling through overexposure to words that were received intellectually but never metabolized into transformation. Here is the tension this passage contains that most institutions have never allowed to surface fully. Jesus was not trying to reach everyone equally, not in the sense that he did not love everyone equally, but in the sense that the mode of his teaching was calibrated for a particular kind of interior readiness. And he knew that many of the people listening had a heart condition that would prevent the truth from entering, regardless of how clearly it was stated. The institution has spent 2,000 years softening that sentence. Jesus never did. That is not a comfortable observation. It was not meant to be. What does a dull heart actually mean in lived experience? Not as a theological category. What does it feel like from the inside to be looking directly at truth and not seeing it? Because it does not feel like blindness from the inside. That is the crucial thing. It feels like clear vision. It feels like discernment. It feels like knowing what is real and what is not. Which means the most unsettling possibility this passage opens is that a person with a dull heart does not know they have one. If Jesus genuinely desired all to be healed, and the text clearly says he did, then why would he use a method that by his own description prevents many from reaching that healing? That question has an answer. But the answer is not what most people expect, and we are not going there yet. Let us deal with the deepest version of this question now. Why would truth be hidden at all? Why would a teacher who came to save the world teach in a way that most people would not understand? The surface explanation, the one that appears in most commentaries, is that parables protected Jesus from political accusation. That veiled language gave him theological deniability with hostile authorities while allowing the inner circle to receive the deeper meaning. And there is something to this. It is not entirely wrong, but it does not account for what Jesus actually said. He did not say he used parables to protect himself from the authorities. He said he used them because it is given unto you and not given unto them. The explanation he offered was interior. It was about the condition of those listening, not about the political environment, not about strategic communication. So we have to follow his own explanation rather than importing a more comfortable one. Here is the thing that changes everything once you see it. Truth is not only information. We live in an age that has fundamentally confused these two things. We assume that truth is propositional, that it exists in statements, that if the statement is accurate and the recipient is intelligent and the channel is clear, understanding will result. That truth transmission is essentially a data transfer problem. Jesus operated on an entirely different model. In his model, some kinds of truth are relational. They are not just statements to agree with. They require a certain posture to be received. Not because God is withholding, but because some realities can only enter a life that is open to them. You have seen this in ordinary experience. You can speak something completely true to someone. It can be kind. It can be accurate. It can be exactly what they need. And if they are already locked into their conclusion, if they are protecting a fixed version of reality, the words reach their ears and go no further. They do not land. Nothing shifts. Nothing takes root. Not because you said it wrong, because they were not in the interior posture that would allow it to enter. This is not a failure of the truth. It is a function of the ground. And now he introduces the statement we touched briefly and have not yet fully opened. Matthew chapter 13, verse 12. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. On the surface, it sounds harsh. Those who have get more. Those who do not have lose even what they have. What kind of spiritual economy is that? But the having he is describing is not money, not intelligence, not religious status or Bible knowledge. It is receptivity, an interior posture, a heart that has been cultivated or neglected. Those who have cultivated that posture receive more, not because they earned it, because more can actually enter. The ground is ready. Those who have neglected it lose even what they thought they had, because without the posture that allows truth to enter and take root, even the truths already received begin to fade. They become inherited positions rather than living realities, doctrines held about a kingdom rather than an experience of one. If it is not intelligence that separates the crowd from the disciples, then what is it? What was present in the 12 that was absent in the thousands who also heard him? It was never about how smart they were. The Pharisees were smarter by every external measure. The scribes had studied longer, remembered more, debated with more technical precision. They had devoted their entire lives to the preparation that should have made them the most ready to receive what Jesus was carrying. And the mysteries were given to fishermen. That detail is not incidental. Jesus did not accidentally gather an unqualified inner circle. The people to whom the mysteries were given were not the most prepared by any institutional standard. They were prepared by something else, something that the scribes and Pharisees, with all their expertise, had somehow moved away from rather than toward. What that something is the question this entire video has been building toward. And the moment we name it, something is going to shift in how you understand not only the parables, but your own interior life. Now, something needs to happen right here. You have been in this conversation for a while, and most people are not still here. Most people who clicked on a video about the parables of Jesus did it with half-divided attention, and they have already moved on. You have not. Something in you recognized that this conversation was asking something real, and you stayed. That staying is already the beginning of the posture we are going to be talking about for the rest of this video. If that recognition is real in you right now, take a moment and like this video, not as a casual click, as an acknowledgement that you are in this, as a way of helping this message reach other people who are sitting exactly where you are right now, in churches or outside of them, loving Jesus but sensing that the version they were given was smaller than who he actually is. Subscribe if you are not already, and leave a word in the comments that says, "I am waking up." Not as a performance, but as a statement of what is already happening in you. Now, let us continue. Parables are filters. That is the functional definition that emerges directly from what Jesus described. Not a label imposed from outside, a description of what his own explanation reveals the parables to be doing. A filter does not change what passes through it. It reveals what was already present in what it is filtering. The same parable, spoken to the same crowd, in the same field, on the same afternoon, produces entirely different results in different people. Not because some people are clever enough to crack the code and others are not, but because the parable is making visible something that was already true about the interior posture of the listener before the first word was spoken. This is why Jesus could stand in front of thousands of people and speak a single story about a farmer scattering seed, and walk away having communicated the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven to a handful of disciples, and having communicated essentially nothing of lasting substance to the rest of the crowd. Not because he was speaking two different messages, because the parable itself was doing the filtering work. Now look at what happens in the text immediately after the parable of the sower is spoken. The crowd hears it. There is no recorded response from the crowd, no pressing in, no movement toward him. The narrative simply moves on. The disciples, however, came to him. The Greek word for came here is proselthontes. It means they approached, they drew near. They initiated movement toward him in a way the crowd did not, and they asked privately. That word privately is doing significant work in this passage that most people don't notice. The disciples do not call out from the crowd. They find him apart from the others and they ask. This private asking is a posture. It is what hunger looks like in motion. It is what happens when someone hears something they do not yet understand and cannot rest in that gap. The crowd, by contrast, is comfortable not understanding. Or more precisely, the crowd does not notice what it does not understand. From a defended or divided posture, a parable that does not enter simply feels like a pleasant or puzzling story and then fades. There is no friction, no residue, no quiet burning that keeps the question alive. The disciples had friction. They knew something had been said that they had not yet received, and that knowing drove them toward him. Why did the disciples lean closer while the crowd stood still? What was it in them, in their actual interior experience at that moment, that made them move when others did not? The answer is not that they were spiritually superior. The answer is something more subtle than that. Something that either increases or decreases in you right now based on the choices you are making about how to engage with the words of Jesus. Understanding is not earned, it is given. But given to whom? And by what mechanism? And what, if anything, can you do to position yourself for that giving? These are not rhetorical questions. There are real answers, and we are almost there. Now we slow down. This is the chapter that requires the most from you, because we are going into the parable that Jesus chose as the foundational parable, the one he pointed to as the key to all the others. After the disciples came to him privately and asked for an explanation, Jesus said something that should have stopped every subsequent interpreter cold. He said in Mark chapter 4, verse 13, "Know ye not this parable? And how then will ye know all parables?" This one is the master key, the one that, if understood correctly, opens every other parable he told, and it is a parable about hearing, which is exactly what the entire discussion in Matthew chapter 13 has been about. Not farming, not agricultural economics. Hearing, the interior mechanics of what happens when the word of the kingdom arrives at a human heart. The parable of the sower. A farmer goes out to scatter seed. The seed is the same throughout. The farmer is the same. The scattering method is the same. The only variable is the ground on which each seed falls. And the ground determines everything. Let us go through each soil slowly, not as categories of other people, as interior conditions. Because Jesus was not describing 4 kinds of people out there. He was describing 4 postures that can exist within a single person at different times, and even simultaneously in different areas of a life. The seed that falls on the hard path. The path is compacted earth, not rock, not poison. Just earth that has been walked on so many times, by so many feet, that the surface has become impenetrable. The seed cannot enter. It sits on the surface until the birds come and take it. What compacts interior ground? Familiarity without transformation. Hearing without receiving. Being around the Word of God constantly, in services and in songs and in podcasts and in devotionals, without allowing any of it to actually enter and change something real. The repeated passage of familiar truth across the surface, without it ever being genuinely metabolized into transformation, creates a kind of theological callus, a heart that has heard so much that it has stopped being moved by any of it. And here is what makes this soil so difficult to diagnose from the inside. Hard soil does not feel hard from inside it. It feels like discernment. It feels like wisdom. It feels like knowing what is true and what is not, what is real theology and what is deviation, what deserves engagement and what can be safely dismissed. Hard soil often presents to its owner as theological confidence. But it is actually a condition in which the word arrives and nothing happens. It sits on the surface, and then it is gone. Ask yourself something honestly. Is there a part of your interior life that has become so familiar with the words of Jesus that it no longer actually responds to them? Not a part that rejects them. A part that agrees with them immediately and moves on without being changed. That is the hard path. The seed that falls on rocky ground. Rocky soil is different from hard soil. It has some surface receptivity. The seed enters. Something begins. There is what Jesus himself calls immediate joy. An emotional experience of having encountered something true and good. But there is no depth. The rock underneath prevents the root from going downward. And when the sun comes up, when difficulty arrives, when following this truth begins to cost something real, the plant withers. Not because the person is insincere, because the initial reception was real but shallow. The emotion was present but the root was not. This is perhaps the most painful soil condition to recognize in yourself. Because the experience of initial joy is real. The excitement when a truth lands is genuine. But if it never moves below the level of feeling into the actual structure of how you live, if it produces emotion without reorganization, if it generates enthusiasm without the willingness to stay with it through the cost, it is rocky ground. The plant looked alive, but there was no root. The seed that falls among thorns. The thorny soil is not compacted. It is not shallow. The seed enters, the root goes down. Something genuine grows. But the growth happens in competition. The thorns are already there, established, drawing from the same soil, occupying the same space. Jesus names the thorns clearly, the cares of this age, the deceitfulness of wealth, the desire for other things. Not necessarily evil desires, just other desires, the normal pressures of life, the quiet pull of wanting more, the fear of losing what you have, the constant tug of competing loyalties. Divided attention cannot produce a unified life. And this thorny condition is so common now that it feels normal. Most people are not opposed to Jesus. They are divided toward him. And then the good soil. Jesus does not describe good soil as morally superior soil. He does not describe it as the soil that has done the most religious work or accumulated the most correct doctrine. He describes it as soil that hears the word and understands it and bears fruit. The Greek word for understands here is suniemi. It means to bring together, to cause to come into contact, to allow something to penetrate and integrate with the existing structure rather than simply passing through the mind and leaving no trace. Good soil is not passive, it is receptive, which is a different thing. Passive soil just lies there. Receptive soil is actively oriented toward receiving. It has been cultivated, loosened, cleared, made ready for something it is genuinely expecting and genuinely wanting. And now I want you to do something, not as a spiritual exercise for later, right now, in this moment. Which soil are you right now? Not which soil have you been, not which soil should you aspire to be. In this conversation, in the way you are holding what is being said, what is the condition of the ground? Is there a layer of immediate agreement covering a lack of genuine reception? Is there excitement present, but also the awareness that it may not survive contact with your actual life? Is there genuine hunger, but also the background noise of 10 other things pulling at the edge of your attention? Or is there something quieter? Something that is simply open and still and willing to receive whatever arrives? There is no performance here. No one can see your answer but you. But here is what should stop you entirely. The parable is describing you while you listen to it. The posture you bring right now is the very thing the parable is exposing. This is not just a story about farmers in ancient Judea. It is revealing the mechanism that decides, in this moment, how much of what is being said actually enters you. If the soil determines what the word can produce, can the soil change? Because if the answer is no, this whole conversation is a kind of verdict with no appeal. But if the answer is yes, then everything depends on understanding how soil changes. And that question is the hinge on which the rest of this conversation turns. The answer is yes. But the mechanism of that change is not what most people in most churches have been taught. And the difference between the mechanism you were given and the real one is exactly the gap between explanation and transformation. We have been circling the center of this conversation for 5 chapters now. We watch the crowd and the disciples hear the same words and have entirely different responses. We examine the soil conditions that determine what the word can produce. We establish that the dividing variable is not intelligence, not religious credential, not cultural preparation. Now we name it. It is posture. Specifically, it is the constellation of interior orientations that the disciples embodied and the crowd did not. And when we look at what those orientations actually were, they are not exotic. They are not mystical techniques. They are deeply human capacities that either get cultivated or get neglected, depending on what you prioritize. The first is humility, not self-deprecation, not acting small in a religious way. Real humility is simply knowing what you do not yet understand. The disciples come to Jesus and ask him to explain the parable. They do not pretend. They name the gap between what was said and what they grasped. And in naming that gap, they create space for more to be given. Humility, in this sense, is the ability to stay in not knowing, to carry a question without rushing to close it, to let the gap remain open long enough for something real to enter. The second is hunger, genuine hunger, not spiritual ambition, which is a different thing entirely. Not the desire to be known as someone who goes deep, which is performance, but the honest, unmanaged experience of not being satisfied by what you have been given, of sensing that there is more than what you have accessed, of being drawn toward something you cannot fully name but cannot stop moving toward. The disciples had left things, real things, fishing boats that represented livelihood, tax tables that represented security. They had made themselves available at a cost. Not because they fully understood what they were moving toward, but because what they were moving toward was pulling at something in them that the things they left behind could not satisfy. That is hunger. And it creates a very specific kind of interior availability. The third is private seeking. When the disciples wanted to understand, they did not call out from the crowd. They found him privately. They moved toward the source when no one was watching and no social performance was required. They engaged from the part of themselves that was most genuinely seeking rather than from the part that was visible to others. There is something in this that deserves a moment of honest reflection. How much of your engagement with Jesus happens in the interior, in private? In the space where no one is watching and there is nothing to perform and the only thing present is you and the question? Because that is where the disciples received their explanations, not in the public teaching moment, in the private approach. This may be the most costly one. Certainty is comfortable. It works socially. It gives you a place in a community. It feels like you have arrived. It saves you from the effort of continuing to search. From the inside, certainty can even feel like faith. But certainty reached too early is not faith. It is closure. Enclosed ground cannot receive new seed. The disciples had not arrived at certainty. They were asking. They were still in the question. And it was in that state of genuine not knowing that the mysteries were given to them. Now return with me to Matthew chapter 13, verse 11. It is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Read it now with what you have just been given. The giving is not arbitrary. It is not random election. It is the natural outcome of a relational law. When a person approaches the source of the mysteries with humility, with hunger, with private genuine seeking, with the willingness to lose certainty, something opens. Not because they earned it, because they created the interior conditions for it to be given. Why does religion so often produce the opposite of these conditions? Not as a rhetorical attack. as a genuine diagnostic question, because if the qualities that make the mysteries available are humility, hunger, private seeking, and the willingness to lose certainty, then a system that produces confidence, satisfaction, public performance, and settled answers is, however well-intentioned, producing the soil conditions least likely to receive what Jesus was actually carrying. That is not a condemnation of anyone's faith. It is an observation about a structural problem that has been operating for a very long time. Religion explains. Jesus transforms. Those are not the same process. They do not produce the same person. And what gets lost in the gap between them is not a minor thing. It is the difference between a Christianity that manages behavior and a Christianity that changes the ground. Let me say what I am about to say with care, because this is the place where it would be easy to slide into a tone that is critical or dismissive. That is not what this is. The people who built the institutions of Christianity, who wrote the commentaries, who developed the curricula, who preached the sermons that transmitted the faith across 2,000 years, were, in the vast majority, sincere. They loved Jesus with genuine devotion. They gave significant portions of their lives to making his name known and his teaching accessible. But there is a difference between transmission and transformation, and that difference explains something that millions of people feel but have struggled to name. Here is what happened to the parables over time. They were interpreted systematically, institutionally, authoritatively. Commentaries were written on top of commentaries. Sermons were built on top of those commentaries. Sunday school lessons were constructed on top of those sermons. And in that process of institutional interpretation, something entirely predictable happened. The parables were flattened into moral lessons. The Good Samaritan became a lesson about helping people in need. The prodigal son became a lesson about God's forgiveness. The sower became a lesson about the importance of receiving the word and applying it diligently to your behavior. None of these readings are entirely wrong. They contain real truth, but they are working on a different register than what Jesus was doing. And for 2,000 years, that reduced version has been handed to people as if it were the whole thing. They are extracting behavioral instruction from texts that were designed to produce interior transformation. And there is a profound difference between those two things. When you reduce a parable to a behavioral lesson, the listener walks away with an instruction. Do this. Be like this person. Avoid this attitude. The parable has functioned as a guide to better conduct, and the listener exits the encounter, essentially unchanged in their interior orientation, having received instead a new item on a behavioral checklist. But when the parable is allowed to function as what Jesus said it was, a mystery of the kingdom of heaven, something entirely different happens. The listener does not walk away with an instruction. They walk away with something opened, a gap in what they were certain of, a glimpse of something they had not previously noticed, an interior movement that has no immediate behavioral payoff, but has rearranged something at a deeper level of how they see. Behavior improvement is not transformation. You can modify your conduct significantly without anything fundamental changing in what you are. You can become more generous, more patient, more scripturally literate, more religiously observant, and still be the same compacted surface or rocky shallowness or crowded interior that you were before the process of improvement began. What Jesus came to address was not primarily behavior. He came to address being. He came to address the condition of the interior ground itself, whether the ground of a human life could become the kind of soil in which the kingdom could take root and bear fruit. And he described that work not as instruction, but as seed, not as information delivered from teacher to student, as life deposited into earth, as something that works in the dark, below the level of the cognitive over time, through processes that cannot be managed or accelerated by human effort. This is why the parable form was not a pedagogical choice. It was a theological necessity. You cannot deliver the mysteries of the kingdom through explanation, because the mysteries of the kingdom are not primarily information about God. They are the living reality of God's presence and activity within a human life. And living realities are not transmitted propositionally. They are received through encounter, through receptivity. through the specific interior conditions that allow them to enter and take root. The institutional reduction of the parables to moral lessons was not malicious. It was the natural outcome of bringing the teaching of Jesus into a system that was primarily designed to produce religious conformity rather than interior transformation. A system needs legible outcomes, behavioral metrics, measurable compliance. The mysteries of the kingdom do not produce those things on an institutional timeline. They produce fruit in ways and on schedules that are not manageable. And so the institutional process, over centuries, gradually translated the unmanageable into the manageable, the mystery into the moral, the seed into the instruction. Have you inherited a reduced version of what he actually meant? Not whether your tradition taught you wrong things, whether the version of Jesus' teaching you received was missing a layer, whether what was given to you was sincere but smaller than what he was actually carrying. Because the parables are not locked. The text has not been changed. The words are the same as they were in that field. What Jesus deposited in those stories is still there, still carrying what it was designed to carry. They are not locked. They are waiting. What they are waiting for is not a better commentary. It is not a more enlightened theology. It is a particular condition in the person who encounters them. And that condition is what the final movement of this conversation is about to name directly. We return one final time to the verse this entire conversation has orbited, Matthew 13, verse 11. It is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Let it land now with the full weight of everything we have walked through together. The division Jesus described was not intellectual. It was not theological. It was not based on moral performance or religious lineage or doctrinal correctness. It was relational. Some people had oriented themselves toward him, not perfectly, not without confusion or doubt or misunderstanding, but directionally. They had moved toward the source. They had closed the distance. They had leaned in past the point of comfort, past the point where the crowd had stopped, past the point where maintaining their existing certainties would have required them to turn back. And others had not. The others were not necessarily wicked. The crowd was full of people who genuinely wanted to encounter something real, who had come out to the hillside with real curiosity, real longing for the kingdom they had been waiting for, but who at the moment of encounter were receiving from a distance, engaging through the insulating layer of their existing frameworks, listening to evaluate rather than to receive, hearing the words without allowing them to enter. Distance, in the way this passage describes it, is not primarily physical. It is the space maintained between the self and the possibility of being genuinely changed. And that space is not always maintained consciously. In many cases, it is the accumulated deposit of years of engaging with Scripture in explanation mode rather than receptive mode, of hearing truth talked about rather than allowing truth to work on you, of being in a tradition that is genuinely devoted to Jesus, but has systematically produced the soil conditions least likely to receive what he was actually carrying. Now, I want to ask you one question before we move into the closing. Are you listening to understand, or are you listening to protect what you already believe? Both feel like engagement from the inside. Both involve genuine attention. Both can produce the experience of having engaged seriously with the material, but they are producing entirely different outcomes in the interior ground. Listening to understand requires a prior surrender of the conclusion. It means entering the encounter without knowing where it will end. It means being genuinely available to have something rearranged in you. It carries the specific discomfort of not yet knowing where the stable ground is. Listening to protect is more familiar. It is the mode in which most people engage most religious content most of the time. The existing framework is present. Incoming information is measured against it. What confirms gets absorbed. What challenges gets explained or deflected. The framework remains intact. And the person exits the encounter feeling as though they have engaged seriously. But the seed never entered. Both postures were present in that field. And they produced entirely different outcomes in people who heard the identical words of Jesus. The issue was not the words. The issue was never the words. The issue was the ground. and the ground determines everything. The issue is not whether you understand the parables. The issue is who you are becoming, not who you have been, not who you intend to be, who you are currently becoming, what direction your interior life is moving, whether the ground of your life is, right now in this season, getting more compacted or less, more shallow or deeper, more crowded or clearer, because the parables are still being spoken, not only in texts, in the fabric of your life, in the events that are forming you without your permission, in the questions that will not leave you alone. He is still scattering seed. And the question that everything in this video has been moving toward is not whether you understand the parables. It is what he finds when the seed arrives. We have been in this together for a long time now, and I want to speak to you the way you speak to one person, not an audience. One person, the one who made it here. You came in with a question about parables, and what happened was something different from what you expected. The parables turned around and looked at you. The teaching that was supposed to be examined became the mirror. And something in you, the part that stayed, the part that kept leaning in past the chapter endings, and the unresolved questions, and the moments where a more defended version of you might have clicked away, that part already knows what it encountered here. The disciples were not the most qualified people in that crowd. They were not the most educated or the most religiously prepared or the most spiritually advanced. They were the ones who could not stop following, who found him privately when they did not understand, who stayed in the question instead of forcing a resolution, who were willing, repeatedly, to not know in his company rather than know, certainly, at a distance, and it was given to them. I want to read you one more passage before we close, because it contains perhaps the most intimate description in all of the Gospels of what it feels like when the seed enters ground that is ready. 2 disciples walking to Emmaus, after the crucifixion, in grief, discussing the events they had witnessed and could not make sense of. And a stranger joined them on the road, and they did not recognize him. And he walked with them and opened the scriptures to them and explained the things concerning himself. And when he was gone from them, they said to each other, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way and while he opened to us the scriptures?" Luke chapter 24, verse 32, the burning heart. That is not theological certainty. That is not doctrinal clarity. That is the specific interior experience of truth moving through ground that is open enough to receive it, of the seed entering, of something beginning below the surface that has no immediate behavioral payoff, but is unmistakably real, if you have felt that, even once, even faintly. In a passage that caught you in a way you could not explain, in a silence after reading something that would not close. In the strange persistence of a question about Jesus that keeps returning no matter how many times you think you have settled it. You know what receptive ground feels like. And the path from here is not the acquisition of more information about Jesus. It is the cultivation of the conditions in which what he is carrying can enter more fully. The slow, patient, often uncomfortable work of attending to the interior ground, of noticing where it has become compacted and asking what walked over it so many times, of looking honestly at the rocky places and asking what prevents the root from going deeper, of naming the thorns and being willing to do something about them. The Greek word that Jesus used and that we translate as repent is metanoia. Its root meaning is not primarily remorse. It means a change of mind, a new way of perceiving, a turning of the inner orientation, a fundamental shift in how you see rather than merely what you do. That is what the parables were designed to produce, not better behavior, a different seeing, a metanoia of perception that begins to make visible the kingdom that Jesus said is already within you, already present, already available, waiting not for your performance, but for your receptivity. He said it plainly in Luke chapter 17, verse 21. The kingdom of God is within you, not will be, not could be if you do enough. Is present tense, now. The parables were keys to that kingdom, not explanations of a distant place, mechanisms of interior opening, stories designed to do what explanation cannot do, to move below the level of the cognitive, to find the ground beneath the doctrine and work there, slowly, in the dark, until something breaks through. And they are still doing that, right now, in the same words, with the same capacity. You have been given something in this conversation that many people sitting in full churches, having heard good preaching for years, have not yet received. Not because you are more worthy, because something in you chose to stay, because you leaned in the way the disciples leaned in. And the fact that you can feel the distance between what you came in with and what is sitting in you now is itself the beginning of the answer to every question this video opened. The question is not whether you understand the parables. The question is what kind of ground you will tend between now and the next time you encounter them. If you walk through this entire conversation seriously, I want to acknowledge that simply and honestly, not because staying deserves congratulation, but because what this asked of you was real. It asked you to sit with open questions rather than reach for comfortable answers. It asked you to look at the condition of your own interior ground without flinching. Most content does not ask that, and the fact that you stayed says something about the posture you brought. There is something I want to invite you into that is not more information. It is called the Sacred Scrolls. They are sacred resources designed to help you move through Scripture slowly and intentionally. Not to stand outside the words of Jesus and analyze them, but to enter them, to let them work on you until they move from something you know about into something that has changed you. They are built for depth, not speed. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. And for those who want to go deeper with others rather than only alone, there is our private space. It is not casual. It is for people who love Jesus and sense there is more than what they were handed. People willing to stay with difficult questions and cultivate real interior change. You will find that link in the description and the pinned comment as well. Before you go, carry this with you. If the condition of your interior ground determines what the Word can produce in you, and if that ground can change, what are you actually doing to tend it? Not as performance, not as routine, but as the quiet work of someone who has decided that receptivity is worth cultivating. Sit with that.